The morning sky was covered with dark clouds as workers hurried around Titan Logistics warehouse, preparing delivery trucks for another busy day. Among them was Ethan Brooks, a quiet mechanic in his late 30s. His clothes were stained with grease. His hands were rough from years of honest work, and he drove an old rusty pickup that everyone laughed at. Ethan never argued with anyone. He simply repaired trucks, helped his coworkers, and went home. Most employees respected his kindness, but warehouse manager Richard Collins saw him as weak. Richard believed a mechanic with old clothes could never be important. Every chance he got, he insulted Ethan in front of everyone. That morning, a luxury SUV arrived at the warehouse. Olivia Carter, a professional corporate auditor from the company's headquarters, stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She had come to investigate anonymous complaints about poor management, but Richard welcomed her with a fake smile and immediately blamed every warehouse problem on Ethan. Pointing across the yard, Richard said loudly, "That mechanic is the reason this place keeps falling behind." Olivia watched Ethan carefully. Instead of arguing, he quietly repaired a damaged delivery truck with remarkable skill and precision. Experienced drivers thanked him because they trusted only Ethan to fix their vehicles properly. Something didn't match Richard's accusations. As Olivia continued observing, Richard suddenly lost his temper. In front of dozens of workers, he marched toward Ethan holding a termination letter. "You're fired!" he shouted. "Pack your tools and leave my property immediately." The entire warehouse fell silent. Nobody dared to speak. Ethan slowly put down his wrench, wiped the grease from his hands, and looked calmly into Richard's eyes. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked quietly. Richard laughed loudly. "I've never been more sure in my life." Just then, Ethan's phone rang. He answered, listened for only a few seconds, and smiled faintly before ending the call. Without showing any anger, he looked back at Richard and calmly replied, "Thank you. You just made today's meeting much easier." Before anyone understood what he meant, the warehouse gates opened, and 3 black luxury SUVs rolled inside. Several executives in expensive suits stepped out, followed by company security officers. The lead executive looked around the yard and asked loudly, "Where is Mr. Ethan Brooks?" Every worker looked at Ethan in confusion. Ethan calmly stepped forward. The executive immediately smiled, shook his hand respectfully, and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Brooks. The board of directors is waiting for the owner of this company." A stunned silence swept across Titan Logistics warehouse. Every employee stared at Ethan Brooks, as the senior executive shook his hand with the respect usually reserved for billionaires. Richard Collins' face turned pale. Only moments earlier, he had publicly humiliated the quiet mechanic, and now the executives were addressing him as the company's owner. Richard forced a nervous laugh. "There must be some mistake," he said. The executive slowly turned toward him. "There is no mistake. Mr. Ethan Brooks is the majority shareholder and legal owner of Titan Logistics. 3 years ago, after inheriting the company from its founder, he chose to work undercover in different warehouses to understand how employees were treated and how managers were running the business." The workers gasped in disbelief. Ethan looked around at the people he had worked beside every day. "I didn't come here to test honest employees," he said calmly. "I came to discover who respected people and who abused their authority." Olivia Carter quietly opened her portfolio and placed several reports on a nearby table. They contained months of complaints about Richard's behavior, evidence of intimidation, unfair dismissals, missing bonuses, and company funds that had been misused. Richard's confidence disappeared. "Those reports are false," he shouted. Olivia looked him in the eyes. "Every complaint has already been verified." Ethan remained calm. "The phone call you heard a few minutes ago wasn't about my job. It was from the board of directors. They had finished reviewing the investigation. Company?" Security officers stepped forward and stood beside Richard. For the first time, the arrogant manager realized he was no longer in control. The workers who had been afraid to speak finally found the courage to tell the truth. One by one, they described years of humiliation, threats, and unfair treatment. Richard looked desperately at Ethan. "Please, give me one more chance," Ethan sighed quietly. "I gave you hundreds of chances. Every single day you chose power over respect. Then he turned to the executives and calmly said, "Let's begin today's board meeting." The board meeting began inside the warehouse conference room. But unlike any meeting Richard Collins had ever led, this one was completely under Ethan Brooks's control. Every executive took their seat while Ethan quietly sat at the head of the table. The same employees Richard had once ignored were invited inside to witness the truth. Olivia Carter connected her laptop to the large screen and presented the results of the investigation. Security footage showed Richard intimidating workers, forcing unpaid overtime and taking credit for Ethan's repairs. Financial records revealed thousands of dollars missing from the warehouse budget, while maintenance reports proved that Richard had ignored safety warnings to cut costs. The room fell silent as one piece of evidence after another appeared on the screen. Richard tried to interrupt several times, but every excuse collapsed under the weight of the documents. Then Ethan stood and slowly walked toward the window overlooking the warehouse floor. "When I inherited this company," he said calmly, "I promised my late grandfather that Titan Logistics would always value people before profits. That's why I worked here as an ordinary mechanic. I wanted to know how our employees were treated when they thought no one important was watching." Many workers lowered their heads, remembering how Ethan had helped them repair trucks, bought lunch for struggling coworkers, and stayed late without asking for recognition. Olivia handed Ethan the final investigation report. After reading it quietly, he looked at Richard and said, "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Company security will escort you from the property." Richard's shoulders dropped as security officers stepped forward. Before leaving, he looked around the room and realized not a single employee defended him. The respect he had demanded through fear had disappeared in a single afternoon. Ethan then turned toward the workers and smiled. "Today isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about giving this company back to the people who built it with honesty." The room erupted in applause as Hope returned to Titan Logistics for the first time in years. Richard Collins walked out of Titan Logistics with a cardboard box holding the few personal items left from his office. The same employees who had once feared him silently watched as security escorted him through the front gate. No one celebrated his downfall. Instead, they felt relieved that years of fear had finally come to an end. Ethan Brooks stood in the warehouse yard, looking at the workers who had kept the company running despite poor leadership. He climbed onto the loading dock so everyone could see him. "I didn't work beside you as a mechanic because I wanted praise," Ethan began. "I wanted to understand what this company had become. I saw hardworking people treated unfairly, honest workers ignored, and good ideas pushed aside. That ends today." The employees listened in complete silence. "From this moment forward," Ethan continued, "every employee will receive fair wages, safe working conditions, and the respect they deserve. Promotions will be earned through honesty and hard work, not fear or favoritism." The crowd broke into loud applause. Olivia Carter smiled proudly. During her investigation, she had seen many companies, but she had never met an owner willing to spend years working beside ordinary employees just to learn the truth. She walked over to Ethan and handed him the final audit report. "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks," she said. "Titan Logistics finally has the leader it deserves." Over the following months, the warehouse changed completely. Old equipment was replaced with modern machinery. Employee bonuses were restored. Training programs were introduced, and safety became the company's highest priority. Workers who had once dreaded coming to work now arrived with pride, knowing their voices mattered. One afternoon, Ethan parked his same old rusty pickup outside the warehouse. A young mechanic asked him, "Sir, you're the owner now. Why don't you buy a luxury car?" Ethan smiled as he looked at the old truck. "This pickup reminds me where I came from," he replied. "A person's value isn't measured by the car they drive or the clothes they wear. It's measured by how they treat others." The workers nodded, understanding the lesson. As the sun set behind the warehouse, Ethan watched trucks leave the loading docks, knowing the company was stronger than ever, not because of bigger profits, but because it was built on honesty, respect, and kindness. Never judge someone by their appearance. The quietest worker in the room may be the one with the greatest responsibility and the biggest heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful Emotional stories with unforgettable twists. See you in the next story. The end.